Let's talk about the single most important journey you will never, ever see. We're going to follow a single cell, from the moment it's born all the way to the moment it splits in two. And in doing so, we're going to uncover the secret engine that literally drives all of life.
You know that annoying paper cut you got last week that's already vanished? Or how about the fact that you grew from a tiny baby into, well, you? The answer to both of those things is exactly the same, an incredible microscopic process called the cell cycle.
So what is it? Simply put, the cell cycle is a cell's entire life story. It's this highly organized sequence of events with one big goal: to create two perfect, identical daughter cells from a single parent cell. It's the blueprint for multiplication.
Now, you might think a cell's life is all about that one dramatic moment of splitting in two, right? But the reality is actually pretty surprising. A whopping 90% of its time is spent just getting ready, in a phase called interphase. The actual division part, mitosis, is just a tiny, tiny fraction of its life. It is all about the prep work.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to follow our cell's life story, see how it gets ready for the big moment, witness that dramatic split, understand the crucial safety systems that prevent total disaster, and then we'll connect it all back to our own health.
Okay, so the whole cycle is basically broken down into four main phases. But before we even get to the main event, there's this really fascinating side path that some cells take.
Think of this G0 phase as a permanent pause button. Some cells, like our mature nerve and muscle cells, are just busy doing their jobs, and they don't really need to divide anymore. So they just step out of the cycle and enter this resting state. It's kind of like taking an exit ramp off the cellular highway.
But for the cells that are destined to divide, their journey starts with interphase. That's the 90% of their life we just talked about, all spent on preparation. And, don't let the name fool you. This is anything but a resting phase. It is an incredibly active period of growth.
You can think of interphase like a three-act play. First, in G1, the cell grows. Then, in the S phase, it makes a perfect copy of all its DNA. And finally, it does one last round of checks in G2. So let's take a closer look at each of these acts.
So G1, or gap 1, is all about growth. The cell is just bulking up, producing all the proteins and other parts it needs, and basically just living its best life. This is also where it's listening for outside signals, like are there enough nutrients around? Is the body giving it the green light to go ahead and divide?
Once the cell commits, it enters the S phase, which stands for synthesis. And this is, without a doubt, one of the most critical steps. The cell has to make a perfect, error-free copy of its entire genetic blueprint, its DNA. This has to be incredibly precise because even one little mistake here could be disastrous down the line.
And the result? By the end of this S phase, the cell has doubled its DNA. It's also duplicated these little structures called centrosomes, which are going to act like anchors during the division. It is now fully equipped to become two cells.
And finally, we hit G2, or gap 2. The cell does a little bit more growing, but its most important job right now is to proofread. It goes over all that newly copied DNA, making sure every single letter is correct before the big split.
All right, and now for the moment we have all been waiting for, the M phase. This is it. This is that short, action-packed 10% of the cycle where the cell actually divides. It is just this beautifully choreographed mechanical dance.
It all happens in this absolutely breathtaking sequence. First, the copied chromosomes bunch up and condense so you can see them. Then, in this amazing display of organization, they all line up perfectly right in the middle of the cell. Next, they get pulled apart to opposite ends. Then, two new nuclei form around each set of chromosomes. And finally, the cell itself splits right down the middle. That last part is called cytokinesis.
Now, this final split happens a little differently depending on what kind of cell we're talking about. In animal cells, like ours, the membrane just pinches inward, kind of like pulling the drawstring on a bag, until it separates into two. But plant cells, they've got those rigid walls, so they have to build a whole new structure called a cell plate right down the middle, which becomes a new wall between the two new daughter cells.
So we've just seen this incredible, really complex dance of growing and copying DNA and splitting. But with so many moving parts, there are a million opportunities for things to go wrong.
And that is the crucial question, isn't it? What if the DNA gets damaged during copying? Or what if it isn't copied right in the first place? How does a cell stop itself from making faulty new cells? Well, the answer lies in this brilliant internal quality control system.
It has these things called cell cycle checkpoints. Just think of them as molecular traffic lights. The first one, at the end of G1, is the big one. It's the point of no return. It asks, is the cell healthy enough to divide? The second one, right before mitosis, checks, was the DNA copied correctly? And the third one, right in the middle of mitosis, asks, hey, are all the chromosomes lined up properly before we pull them apart?
And these checkpoints are enforced by some serious molecular guardians. The most famous one is a protein called P53, and it stands watch at that first critical checkpoint. If it detects even the tiniest bit of DNA damage, it slams on the brakes, halting the entire cycle until that DNA can get repaired. It's the cell's ultimate protector.
Okay, so we've journeyed through this incredible, super intricate process. Now let's just zoom out for a second and see why this cellular clockwork is so unbelievably vital to our very existence.
Because it is absolutely fundamental to our lives. This cycle is the whole reason we can grow from a single cell into a complex organism. It's the reason our bodies can heal wounds and regenerate tissue. But when this finely tuned process goes wrong, it can lead to one of our most feared diseases.
And this is the dark side of the cycle. Cancer, at its very core, is a disease of the cell cycle. It's what happens when cells get damaged, maybe to a guardian gene like P53, and they just start blowing through all the stop signs. They just keep dividing and dividing and dividing, completely out of control.
So here's the bottom line. The cell cycle is the engine of life. It's a beautiful process of renewal and growth, and it's governed by these super strict rules. But it also holds the key to disease. And as we learn more about how to control these checkpoints, the ultimate question becomes, can we learn how to rewrite the cycle? Can we learn to restart it in cells that have stopped? Or, maybe even more importantly, stop it in cells that just won't?